Good afternoon and welcome to this GSA Insights Webinar, where our panel of regulators, operators and industry analysts will examine the topic of mmWave 5G in Europe. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. Please do feel free to pose any questions you have during the event using the chat function, and the panel moderator will be able to see them and draw on them to inform and guide that discussion. We will be sharing all the materials from today, including reports and presentations, along with a recording immediately after the event. Today, we're joined by senior representatives from mobile operators, including Beeline, Elisa and Fastweb, telecom regulators from Finland, Germany and Italy, and industry analysts from Gsm Intelligence and Analysys Mason. To provide the wider context for our discussion today, Simon Sherrington, GSA's Head of Research, will draw on GSA's Gambods database, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a fantastic resource available to GSA members and associates. That's packed full of the latest global data, and he'll be using that to share the latest information on mmWave spectrum deployments and devices. But to open today's webinar, I'd like to hand over to Stuart Cook, Chairman of GSA Spectrum Group, to introduce the topic and say a few words about GSA's work at WRC 19 and now as we lead into WRC 23.
Thank you, Richard. On behalf of the GSA, the Global Suppliers Association, it really is my privilege to open this and welcome you to this webinar. GSA, as well as the statistics and market aspects that Richard talked about, we have a spectrum group that's very active, and I chair the global spectrum team, and we have a team in Europe as well as other teams around the world. And as we kind of embark on this mmWave adventure, this journey, we thought it would be good to bring a focus to one aspect of 5G spectrum, and particularly mmWave spectrum in Europe. If I look back at that journey, we have at the global level, as Richard mentioned, the ITU, and we started this in 2015 by the industry, the vendors, the operators, the regulators proposing an agenda item for the WRC in 2019 for mmWave spectrum. And at the end of 2019, at that World Radio Conference in Egypt, we were very fortunate enough to have 26 gigahertz range, the 40 gigahertz range, as well as other bands identified for IMT and 5G. And so at that global level, we now have the ITU regulations in place. And at the European level, we have the Union, the Commission, the CPT, all doing its activities and work, and those regulations are now in place. And so it's at the national level where lots of the debates now are taking place. A number of administrations have licensed some of the mmWave spectrum already, the 26 gigahertz bands, and lots more this year and next year are planning to make that assignment and licensing. And so as I look at this conference, we've got regulators from countries that have licensed the spectrum already, Finland, Italy, Germany, and it's great to have those folks there. The operators from Russia, Italy, Finland, that now have the licenses and are trying to figure out what to do with mmWave. How does it fit into its spectrum portfolio? Which services, which deployment strategies, timings, etc. should they go with? And then some great insights from Gsm Intelligence, and Jeanette from Analysys Mason may share some of her views as well. And so it's at that national level, I think, now, the debate, and we wanted to start that conversation and share experiences as we embark on those initial deployments. And With millimeter wave, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a gentleman many years ago, and he was at the radio conference in 1992, a long time ago, and that's where the first chunk of IMT spectrum was identified, and that was for 3G. And he was telling me that some of the folks at the conference, some of the regulators and the industry, they were skeptical, and they said you would never get mobile to work at 2 gigahertz. It was a crazy idea. And here we are, several decades later, embarking on mobile in the millimeter wave spectrum at 26 and 40 gigahertz, etc. And so, as Richard said, please do ask questions as we go through these panels. And one more thing I'm reminded of is with 5G, we talk about innovation in the radio technology, in the core network technology, but has there been innovation in the spectrum as well? And I would suggest that there is, with millimeter wave, the very high frequencies for mobile, but also the way it's being licensed, not just nationally, but some local licensing, shared spectrum. So that innovation perhaps is also there in the licensing approach. So as licensing, I'd suggest without any further ado, we crack on and get on with the regulatory panel. So it's my pleasure to invite Thomas from BNetzA, the German regulator, Mauro from AGCOM, the Italy regulator, and Pasi from Finland, Traficom, the Finnish regulator. So if we could bring those in, Richard, that would be great.
Simon first with the research. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Simon.
No
Sorry,
worries.
I'm looking at the wrong one. So, Simon, sorry about that. Over to you, and then we'll start the regulatory panel after that.
Or not, as the case may be. He's online, but anyway, we'll do a quick pivot and we'll go to the panels. I'll go and get the panelists for the regulatory panel now, and then we can come back to Simon's research.
Ah, okay. I knew something already. We're just waiting for Mauro to join us, and then we'll get cracking. Hi, Pasi. Hi, Thomas. Hi, Mauro.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mauro. So thank you very much for joining us. And I know that you have been at the center of the licensing discussions in your countries. And I look at Europe and the 40-odd countries in the CPT, and it's remarkable, isn't it, how with 3 countries here, Finland, Germany, and Italy, we have 3 different approaches to licensing. We have, I guess, Finland, I would call a hybrid. Some of the spectrum is nationwide and some local at 26. Germany with local approach for 26 and and Italy with a club use approach. And I guess maybe some folks don't understand that each country comes from a different situation and different constraints and requirements. So what we thought for today's panel was to spend 3 or 4 minutes from each presenter telling us what the challenges were, what the constraints were, how did you get to the approach you decided on in your country. So some of the background and challenges and the approach, and maybe some of your observations, and then we can go into a discussion for the remaining 10 minutes. So Thomas, why don't we kick off with you, introduce yourself and tell us about the history, the background, the challenges.
Okay, my name is Thomas Heutmann. I'm from the Federal Network Agency, and my section is responsible for, among other things, for the 5G and the 3.7 gigahertz and the 26 gigahertz band. So let me tell you something about the 26 gigahertz band. Yeah, of course, we had a lot of internal discussions with the public on how to proceed on this matter. And I think we started in 2018, and you see, it took a long time before we come to the conclusion. I will give you some highlights what was discussed during these consultations. I will start with the current utilizations in the 26 gigahertz band. So unfortunately for 5G, there is no free frequency for use in this band. In the upper part, we have the Earth exploration satellite system. In the lower part, the fixed service. And fixed service, there are about 20,000 links, Earth stations, about 10, but they have a large coordination distance. And fixed service mostly of the public mobile operators. But they told us, oh, we need these frequencies at least another 5 years before we have fiber optic cable to our base stations. So that was a restriction, so to say, on how to proceed. No free space in frequencies to have it nationwide. And so we had a closer look on it. And one item we also looked at was the availability of 5G equipment in the 26 gigahertz band. And a lot of comments in our public consultation was, oh, there is only equipment available in the upper part, the first 1 gigahertz, because it's an overlap with the US and Asia. And so it was not possible to have a band segmentation that was discussed during these events. Maybe have the upper part for the industry, the lower part for the public operators. And they said, the public operators, no, there is no equipment available. So band segmentation was no solution. And as you know, the 26 gigahertz is only for small local applications. There would be no nationwide network in 26 gigahertz, so that all leads to this local approach in Germany. And I think it's, from our point of view, the most flexible approach, because we have no band segmentation, as I mentioned before. So the applicant can apply for an area that he has to define himself. And but he has to put up a network within 12 months' time within this area. Otherwise, we will try to revoke the frequency. So I think this is an advantage, so that he will only apply for a reasonable area and maybe then use it for 5G. And yes, okay, we also took some of the experience we had in the 3.7 gigahertz band with this operator agreements, so that neighboring 5G networks should have discussions and find the best solutions. And Yes, I think these are some of the items we discussed. I think I can't discuss and present all these items, but nevertheless, at January 1st of this year, we started with the application procedure, and now we hope that we will get a lot of applications in this frequency band, and we hope that this will be a large success for 5G in 26 gigahertz.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And are you able to say if you've had any applicants yet?
Yeah, okay, we have one applicant, but the procedure is as follows. We gather all the applications until March 31st for the first 3 months. In order, if there is any short incoming, so to speak, each and everyone wants to have frequencies at the same spot at railway stations or so on, so that we have the possibility to sort it out and to make every applicant happy in this frequency band.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. So, Pazzi, over to you.
Thank you, Stuart, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Pasi Toivonen. I work at the Traficom Finland in a unit dealing with the digital infrastructure. But basically, I have been working quite many years on spectrum-related issues, and that is, of course, part of the digital infrastructure also. A small advertisement in the beginning. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we went through the spectrum auction process last year for the 26 gigahertz band, and at the end of 2020, only 3 EU members had assigned the spectrum in all of the 3 pioneer bands, as indicated in the 5G action plan, and Finland being one of them. Then going to the issue itself, when assigning spectrum, the role of the regulator is not only to provide the, let's say, long-term insurance for the investments, but also to provide opportunities for innovation, and private 5G networks will certainly be something new to enable various user cases and innovation. Naturally, the spectrum in the 26 gigahertz is also very important for the MNOs in future in order to have the full set of spectrum, the low, mid, and high frequency spectrum. Then something or reasoning why we came up with this, let's say, hybrid model, as you described it, Stuart. Back in 2018, when we were auctioning the spectrum in the 3.5 gigahertz band, one of the issues discussed was whether all of that spectrum needs to be distributed to the mobile operators, or should some of the spectrum be reserved for the private networks. Since by that time, the 3.5 gigahertz frequency band was considered as the most important 5G band for the introduction of 5G services, our government decided to assign all of the spectrum for the MNOs. And 2 or 3 years ago, there was much less interest on the private networks and the corresponding spectrum compared to the situation today. Since summer last year, it has been possible to introduce private networks based on LTE technology in the 2.3 gigahertz band. But the current bandwidth is only 20 megahertz, and considering that there is no wide availability of equipment for 5G yet in that band, there is a clear need to assign spectrum for private networks in the spectrum. Let's say it's which is more harmonized to 5G, and this is definitely now the millimetric wave at the 26 gigahertz. In Finland, the process of assigning spectrum for this band started already before the WRC 19, where the final decisions on the conditions of use and identification of that band for 5G was made. And the entire 26 gigahertz band, as included in the Commission decision, was basically available from the very beginning for 5G in Finland. Starting point for drafting the spectrum plan was to estimate the spectrum requirements for MNOs and whether a dedicated band should be assigned to private 5G networks, and how much spectrum is required for that purpose. And at the time we were drafting this plan, the maximum bandwidth for 5G radio channel was 400 megahertz. And with the carrier aggregation with two of these, the 800 megahertz bandwidth seemed to be technically feasible for a single 5G network. And since one of the main themes in the spectrum auctions in Finland previously had been to provide possibility for equal access to spectrum for all operators, it was decided to set up a spectrum cap of 800 megahertz in the auction for MNOs. So the auction covered the band 25.1 to 27.5 gigahertz. So 3 blocks of 800 megahertz. And after the public consultation, the government confirmed to set aside the private spectrum for the private networks in the remaining spectrum, which is altogether 850 megahertz. And then just a few observations. For the 26 gigahertz private networks, the general frame of conditions of use are currently in the public consultation, and it is actually today the final day to submit an opinion or comment on these conditions. And these conditions are quite interesting. Let's put it that way. What we expect for these private networks is the dominant usage could be PMR style closed user groups, which could be introduced, for example, factories, power plants, harbors, airports. But the new element is the licensing procedure or regime, where my office, Traficom, is able to issue licenses for MNO style operation of private network for a geographically limited area, and also for private networks with a, let's say, a limited number of customers. And these kind of networks could be implemented for shopping centers, campus areas, or even for villages or small towns. But the details are still to be worked out before the first license will be issued later this spring.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pasi. So we have the local licensing from Germany, the hybrid, national, 3/4 of the spectrum, a quarter for local. Mauro, how about the club use? That generated a lot of interest around the world. Over to you, Mauro.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Thank you for inviting me in this webinar. Well, you know that AGCOM was the first European regulator to define a regulation for the award of all the 3 5G pioneer bands at once. And so far, only 3 countries, as far as I remember, 3 or 4, have assigned the 26 gigahertz band. And also, we are happy to say that in Italy, the first commercial 5G services was launched already mid-2019 in the major Italian cities, and now the service is speeding up all over Italy. Our regulation tried to promote an efficient use of spectrum by including some, so to speak, innovative measures, including the use it or lease it clause in 3.6 GHz band and the club use at 26 GHz. And here you should consider that when we decided about that regulation, when we defined our measures, it was at a very early stage at the time. We are talking at the beginning of 2018, so very early in the 5G process, and this was one of our main challenges. Since we have to try to be as much as forward-moving as possible. It's more than 3 years ago. So coming up to the club use we adopted in Italy, the general rules are rather simple. The rights of use is individual, but not exclusive. That means that each licensee, and we have 5 licensees, each with 200 megahertz band each, in total 1 gigahertz. All licensees can dynamically use all the awarded spectrum. That means 1 gigahertz in any place where frequencies are not used by the other licensees. Now, each licensee can stipulate commercial agreements with all the others for dividing the spectrum between them in any place. Of course, we anticipate that the first that deploys the network in a given place will want to use all the spectrum until one or more of the others want to access in the same place. In that case, spectrum should be shared. This mechanism should then stimulate agreements and cost sharing. Of course, there are legal safeguards. Any license holder has the preemptive right on its 200 megahertz lot. That means that if you don't reach an agreement, you can always install your network and use your frequency lot. No one can prevent this. But this is not mutually convenient. The best would be to install equipment capable of using the whole spectrum. You can start using, let's say, 3, 4, or 5 blocks, up 800 megahertz up to 1 gigahertz. Then, if another operator wants to jump in, then you basically have to share the spectrum with the newcomer or newcomers. Rules to do that are not defined yet, but in the end, rules to be defined are conceptually simple. For each station, how long time an operator should take to relinquish a given lot to another member of the club. You can employ a self-organizing station, that's called SON, S-O-N, and offer access to all players. Or you can use a more static mechanism with a simple database, whose management can be given to a trusted third party. And there is one already available. We decided that MNOs themselves should propose a mechanism that is in their mutual interest. We anticipate that the operator per public area will proceed to cover, and then others may share. This would be efficient. One last thing, of course, AGCOM can intervene to address any eventual dispute between operators, as in our remit, within the regulatory framework. And we can also impose changes to the rules if we find some anti-competitive effects. But other than the discussion for the rules, also many trials are being carried out right now using all spectrum available in the 26 gigahertz band. And so also practice is going on. So I'd stop here and leave for the second part of the discussion the access and how to deploy private and local networks in this band. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mauro. As always happens with these events, we've almost run out of time already. So would you believe that 20 minutes is already up? So I'm not sure, unfortunately, there'll be time for a discussion. We've had a number of questions. Just to clarify some of the questions, Germany looking spectrum from 24.25 up to 27.5, the same with Finland, and Italy 26.5 to 27.5 at the moment. And we could talk about this for a long time, but I know from the insights I have that each country has its own unique circumstances which it has to deal with when licensing. So this idea that one size fits all in millimeter wave in terms of the licensing approach, it isn't quite there. So we end up with a local licensing, a hybrid, and a club use. Just to answer Thomas's question on the equipment availability, I'm from the GSA, spoken with my colleagues in the vendor community. I'm very confident about the equipment availability for the whole of the band. So the 26.5 to 27.5 is available now, but in terms of that whole band, Thomas, that will be available this year.
Okay, that's fine.
A number of infra chipset devices. So I'm sorry, folks, we've run out of time. I need to now hand back to the presentation and Richard and Simon. Thank you very much, Mauro, Kazi, and Thomas.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Hello, everybody. Apologies for the technical error earlier. This is Simon Sherrington. I'm the Vice President of Research at GSA. And I'm going to be talking to a few slides discussing the global state of millimeter wave spectrum for 5G to act as a bit of a backdrop to the rest of the event. The data is drawn from the various databases maintained and the reports published by the GSA, including its mobile operator spectrum database, its spectrum calendars, its databases on networks, technologies, chipsets, and of course its long-running Gambod global database of LTE and 5G devices. So as you can see, there's quite a range. These are all updated regularly, and they're available to associates and members, with statistical snapshots being published for registrants in the wider community. I'd encourage you to check some of those out. So what does our research tell us about millimeter wave technology and deployment? Well, I think the first place to start is to look at 5G in general for a bit of context, and the charts here tell the story. 5G rollout is proceeding quickly around the world. There are companies with live 5G networks on all continents and a tremendous number of operators investing in 5G. In fact, GSA has identified now 414 operators in over 130 countries or territories that are investing in 5G networks in some form, whether they're engaged in tests and trials, pilot projects, planning deployments, they're acquiring licenses, or whether they're engaged in actual deployments. If we compare that to LTE, there are now, after over a decade of LTE networks, just over 800 LTE networks worldwide. So although the overlap of the two data sets is not exact, it shows there are roughly half as many operators investing in 5G as there are in LTE already. Of those, 148 operators in 63 countries or territories have launched commercial 3GPP compatible 5G services, including either mobile or fixed wireless access services. There have been some non-3GPP compatible services that have been launched out there, and some services that have been called 5G that are not, which we don't count in our statistics. 142 of those that have launched 5G mobile services, so you can see that's the large majority, and about 47 have launched 5G fixed wireless access services, so about a third. The map you can see there also shows soft launches. We only count 5G as fully launched, commercially launched, when the network is operational, when devices are available, and when customers can use the services. There have been quite a few occasions when network launches have been announced, but device or service availability has lagged behind by weeks or sometimes months, and we describe those as soft launches. Most networks launched so far, not all of them, have only used non-standalone 5G. Nevertheless, we can already clearly see a trend towards investment in standalone 5G, either for use in public networks or to support private network projects. And as you've already heard, a millimeter wave is proving to be interesting in that context. 66 operators have been identified by the GSA as investing in 5G standalone, including those engaged in the full range of activities that I've already listed out. But so far, just a few launches. For instance, starting in the US, there was a significant launch last year, and a couple of others have followed. But there have been significant rollout contracts that have been awarded, so we can expect to see this number increase during 2021 and into 2022. And GSA has identified over 25 operators actively deploying 5G standalone now, for either private or public network activities. So as you can see, the 3G world is cracking on apace. So where does millimeter wave fit into this? Well, millimeter wave rollout for 5G is happening too, as these charts show. 175 operators in 48 countries or territories have been investing in 5G millimeter wave, once again, either testing or trialing, planning, buying licenses, or actually deploying or operating networks. So that's just over 40% of all of those investing in 5G. And once again, you can see this is a global process with operators on all continents experimenting with millimeter wave technologies for the purpose of providing higher capacity, higher speed services. As the chart shows, there are several key bands of relevance. The ones most being used now are in the 26 to 28 gigahertz ranges, followed by 37 to 40 gigahertz, and in the USA, 47, 48 gigahertz has also been assigned through an auction process. 132 operators in 21 countries or territories hold licenses enabling millimeter wave deployment in one of those bands I've just mentioned, 26, 28, 37 to 40, 47 to 48. And it's fair to say the USA dominates in terms of licenses awarded, following extensive auctions in 2019 and 2020 of regional permits to use various spectrum ranges that raised over $10 billion in auction revenues. So far, GSA has identified 28 operators as actively deploying millimeter wave spectrum for 5G. That means they're actively putting it into their networks, or in some cases, have started to turn on some sites within their networks for their customers to use. Historically, there have also been some trials at 15 gigahertz, 18 gigahertz, 66 to 76, 81 to 86. No licensing or deployment, and technically 15 and 18 gigahertz are really sub-millimeter wave. We've added those for completeness to give a fuller picture of the high spectrum band range that's been used in 5G trials and tests. Now, you can't launch a service without access to spectrum. Many countries or territories are licensing millimeter wave spectrum in addition to mid and low bands, rather than considering it in isolation. It's one of the spectrum tools that are being used to enable the launch of 5G services. Many countries are looking at the range 24.25 to 29.5 gigahertz and making parts of both the 26 and 28 gigahertz range available, and that's really what this slide is focusing on. The timeline here shows the countries that have been making millimeter wave spectrum, specifically spectrum at 26 to 28 gigahertz, available. Looking at that range, there are now 105 licensed operators, including those with local or regional assignments, and amongst those, GSA has identified 25 operators that have deployed or are deploying millimeter wave infrastructure using that spectrum band within their networks. The timeline also shows others planning to assign the 26 to 28 gigahertz spectrum range during 2021 and 2022, as well as some of those that have done it historically. Millimeter wave auction assignments are expected in at least 17 more countries during that period. Rattling through the ones here, we've got the flags forward. We've got Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Croatia, Denmark, Estonia, Macedonia, Malaysia, Malta, Montenegro, Nigeria, Norway, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, UAE, and Vietnam, all planning the assignment of 26 to 28 gigahertz spectrum in the coming months and years. It's important also to say here that the countries or territories shown on the timeline are likely to be a subset. There are a number of other countries, particularly in Europe, that are consulting on the assignment of millimeter wave spectrum. We might expect to see a few of those running auctions within 2021, perhaps Romania, Bulgaria, Ireland. 40 gigahertz, so the 37.0 to 43.5 gigahertz range, and note the bullet there should say 37.0, not 37.5 gigahertz. That range is also emerging. The USA, as we've mentioned, has been auctioned, so that's one to watch going forward. These charts summarize the range of activity that's going on worldwide, again in the 26-28 gigahertz range. Charts are perhaps a little difficult to read there, so I would encourage you to check out the snapshots that were recently published on the GSA website and that are updated on a regular basis. I mentioned previously that there are many countries considering the assignment of millimeter wave spectrum. These charts show that over 65 countries or territories have assigned, are planning to assign, those marked in blue here once plans become reasonably certain, or are consulting or considering their options in relation to 26-28 gigahertz. There will be others considering what to do as well that we don't know about, and countries go through an extensive process from considering their options, holding consultations to determine what to release, how to release it, when, to finalise the award mechanisms before they get to the point of holding the sale or the assignment process and then assigning the spectrum. I think what is interesting here from these charts as well is it's important to note that the spectrum is being made available not just for public networks. Private and local licensing schemes are being developed too. Austria and Germany have recently opened up millimeter wave spectrum for local and private licensing, following in the footsteps of a few others, including Japan, Hong Kong, and Russia, and that's not a comprehensive list. Alongside the growth of the network side of the business, the range of millimeter wave capable devices is growing too. And of course, it doesn't matter how good your service is, you haven't got devices you can give to your customers, they're not going to be able to use them. The one thing that we've found as we've researched the devices market is that many vendors are quite vague about band support in pre-commercial devices. Sometimes also in commercial devices, but certainly with pre-commercial devices, we don't always hold data on spectrum band support. So the figures we show here show devices that support any millimeter wave devices, as well as devices support specific spectrum bands. And there's a difference in those numbers because the specific spectrum band information is much more sparse. But what we've identified is that there are 112 millimeter wave devices that have been announced into the market, up from 95 in 3 months. Now, that means millimeter wave support is announced in about 19% of all available devices, so just under 20%. And the bands most supported are N261, that's the 27.5 to 28.35 gigahertz range with 40 announced devices. N260, 37 to 40 gigahertz with 37 announced devices, and N257, that's the 26.5 to 29.5 gigahertz range with 20 announced devices. If we look at what's commercially available, GSA has identified 64 commercially available millimeter wave devices, up from 46 in 3 months. So although those numbers are still small in the context of the global mobile device ecosystem, the numbers are rising, and they're rising quite quickly. Millimeter wave devices account for 17.5% of all commercial 5G devices that we have been able to identify. Those devices are being developed by a strong vendor ecosystem. The market is quite fragmented, with many vendors having announced 1 or 2 5G devices capable of supporting millimeter wave spectrum, and only a few players have a broader portfolio, often with multiple regional variants of a small handful of models. GSA has identified 52 vendors that have announced millimeter wave devices. Indoor and outdoor CPE, that's the devices used to provide fixed wireless access services for homes and businesses, account for over 40% of all announced millimeter wave capable devices, phones nearly 30%. If we look at the commercially available devices, the 64 we've already talked about, half of them are actually phones, so the millimeter wave capable phones are a significant proportion of that. All those devices are supported by millimeter wave chips from a small set of vendors. We've identified 5 vendors with millimeter wave chips announced. There are 51 announced 5G chipsets, about half of which, or just over half of which, 27, state that they have millimeter wave support. Now that includes discrete modems and processors and platforms. And if we look at that 27, 19 of those are from Qualcomm. They have the greatest number of chipsets in the market at the moment. We think they have 32 of the 64 commercial devices have Qualcomm 5G millimeter wave chipsets in them. Other players with announced millimeter wave chipsets include HiSilicon, MediaTek, Samsung, and we believe Apple. Okay, so I've given you a race through there of the networks, the spectrum, the devices, the vendors. I hope that's given you a very quick taste of the rate at which the millimeter wave ecosystem is emerging. GSA will continue to track auctions, licenses, network deployments, use of millimeter wave in public and private networks, and of course, support within devices and chipsets too, with data made available in reports and databases. And I would encourage you to keep checking in on the GSA website to see our latest releases. I'm going to hand you on now to Emmanuel Coulter from Analysys Mason, who's going to discuss the economics and the return on investment of millimeter wave for 5G. Over to you, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much for the intro, and welcome everyone. My name is Emmanuel Coulter. I'm from Gsm Intelligence, and we would like to show you our latest study, which we did on the cost side of millimeter waves, and we published it, I think, a few weeks ago, and this is relatively fresh, and I would like to just show you the key highlights purely from the business and economic perspective. So just a few quick words of GSM Intelligence. We are the analyst arm for GSMA, and we publish more than 130 reports a year, and we also run, and I personally really proud of our, even if I'm not in that team, but really proud of the forecasting team and the data sets. So we have very accurate, very large data set. We roughly update more than 30 million data points a day. So that was about just GSM Intelligence. And the reason why we started this research is we had the understanding that there was a lot of technical development around millimeter waves in the last few years. So since the first pre-5G millimeter wave FWA network started in the US in October 2018, there was a lot of things around millimeter waves. And most of the things was about, and announcements were about announcement of new data rates, and it could cover even larger areas, which was great. But we wanted to understand purely from a cost side, from the operator side, is it cost efficient to run and build millimeter wave networks? So the reason behind this is that, and I think previous presentation mentioned it earlier, that we're going to face a much more fragmented data demand, and the operators are under a huge cost pressure because they need to pay for the spectrum, they need to deploy nationwide 5G networks, and this is why the cost efficiency was a huge issue. And millimeter waves are able to satisfy this demand in terms of high capacity demand, and we have a relatively underutilized spectrum over 24 gigahertz. How can operators use it cost efficiently? So in the next slide, as one of the pull factor from the operator side was the data demand. And while we expect that there will be roughly 12 billion connections by 2025, the structure of the data traffic will change differently, and we will need a spectrum to accommodate these high capacity data demand. And one of my favorite example is from South Korea, that despite we are in the really early phase of 5G and we don't have the killer use case yet, most probably, those subscribers who have 5G in their phone use 2.5 times more data. And I think that's very, very impressive. Even we don't have this kind of main killer application for the 5G networks. So there will be a huge demand for 5G connectivity. And there were a certain amount of skepticism when we run interviews with operators and vendors about millimeter waves. And one of them was obviously the spectrum availability, that operators actually have to spend a significant amount of money on this. We calculated 14 billion USD investments into millimeter wave related spectrum. Also, the device ecosystem developed very, very quickly. So you already see a few numbers, and I also have some numbers about the millimeter wave capable devices. And on the last slide is the issue with the propagation. Is vendors spend a significant amount of resource on research to improve this coverage. And we also expect that integrated access backhaul will improve the coverage of a millimeter wave based networks on after 3GPP release 16 and release 17 and 18 all will focus at some point with internet access backhauling. So we know that there are a few bottlenecks, but the amount of spectrum what operators will receive and received already are lined up very well here. And I think in the previous presentations, you could also see similar spectrum pipeline as well. But in terms of equipment and devices, and I'm going to focus here on the network equipment side, that we see that there are three main categories of millimeter wave rated equipments. One, these large high capacity macro sites and macro antennas. There are also several micro and like LAMP side, like pole sites available, and also indoor small cells. So we see a lot of integrated solutions where you just need basically, it works relatively similar like a Wi-Fi indoor small cell, and you can provide coverage indoor, as we expect that most of the data demand will continuously coming from indoor environment. So the whole concept was to try to identify the cost difference of running a network purely on 3.5 gigahertz or running and building a network with a combination of midband and millimeter waves. So I think it's really important to highlight that for the we had three scenarios in this research. One of them was a dense urban. When we had a Chinese city and a European city, and we built these hypothetical scenarios with similar environments, and we wanted to understand that how much would it cost for an operator to cover this dense urban area with just purely on 3.5 gigahertz, or with the combination of 3.5 gigahertz and millimeter waves. Obviously, using millimeter waves in these ultra dense areas, hotspots, train stations, bus stations, and so on. We also had an indoor scenario when we had a hypothetical office building with, I think, roughly 3 floors and 500 employees, and we wanted to understand that how much would it cost to cover this office building with sub-6 and Wi-Fi compared to sub-6 Wi-Fi plus millimeter waves. So using a millimeter wave indoor network. And also we had the third scenario where we had 3 sub-scenario, which was about fixed wireless access. So let's see a Chinese dense urban area, a European suburban area, and the rural area from the US. And then we basically identified the data demand in this 3 scenario with this 6 sub scenario. So how much data per square kilometer per area would need by the operator, and also identify the different cost items and build a bottom-up cost model for the operators, and and how much would it cost to cover and satisfy those customers in those areas. So we did use satellite images from all the 6 scenarios, and based on the satellite images, we identified different population density areas and used the unique characteristics and unique data event characteristics for each of these cities. For China, we used 3 different major Chinese cities, and this is how we build a hypothetical from the average. In Europe, we also used 3 European cities. From Europe is very diverse, so obviously we used 3 very diverse areas and used the average of this different areas. And in the office building, we basically used a hypothetical map of an office, 3 floor and 500 employees. So after identifying the data demand per day, we broke down the TCO for each network. So there was a traffic demand related cost factors, such as the population density, 5G penetration, the activity rate in each region, because it could be very different in China or in the US or in Europe, the outdoor ratio for the subscribers. And from the network side, we used the cost assumptions for macro cells, small cells, and the use frequency bands. And inter-site distance was an issue to identify how much base stations do we need to cover this area. And as the outcome, you could see the high-level results here, that in a dense urban scenario, there was 35% cost decrease to cover the dense urban area with the combination of millimeter waves and 3.5 gigahertz. I mean, in many cases, deploying these cells into dense urban areas was a potential saving opportunity, and also the maintenance could be actually significantly lower for the operator. Also, for the FWA scenario, there was a 34% cost advantage, and in the last enterprise scenario, it was a 27%. I think it's really important to highlight that one of the key takeaway was that despite it's relatively a new technology using millimeter wave for the access, you could also see that there is a lot of development around the cost efficiency. So while the first phase of millimeter wave related products and solutions were about mainly the feasibility of the technology, that the technology actually able to satisfy the customers. On the other hand, we see that there is a lot of solutions which were about energy saving and how to save in the transmission, and how can you build larger capacity slides which enable less bandwidth per connection. Also, there is new solutions, how can you save money with energy consumption. So there is still ongoing a lot of development around the cost of these network elements. And we don't really expect in this study that operators will like rip off existing network and just use millimeter waves. We expect that the use of millimeter wave will be more like a complementary layer of the existing network. So just start to build up little islands of millimeter wave coverage. And here you can see a scenario where firstly there is a few FWA islands in a city, and then in the next phase, operators started to build more and more network around very dense and urban areas and hotspots. But we won't really expect that whole countries or cities will be covered in a short period of time in the real. But as we have more devices millimeter wave capable, and there will be new use cases around millimeter waves and new functions, such as the new iPhone 12 is capable to use millimeter waves in the office building, there were some very data demanding use case, some even very futuristic plan in the next few years where the data demand would significantly increase. And this is why we believe that to satisfy these data demand together, there could be an advantage of using these available spectrum over 24 gigahertz. And later on, after 2026, that 3GPP release 17, there will be more coverage extension with integrated access backhaul. So operator can actually build relays and smaller base stations. So no need to backhaul these new layer. So there will be a completely new layer in the network architecture where basically these base stations can donor and then they backhaul with other base stations using wireless connectivity. What we thought to basically sum it up is for operators, I think it's no reason for underestimate the role of millimeter waves. So despite the amount of skepticism, there could be scenarios where millimeter waves are cost efficient, and to consider the use of millimeter wave could be very helpful for operators from a financial perspective, to governments to help the vendor ecosystem and the operator ecosystem to start using millimeter waves and help boom economic growth as well, and also the vendors, that one of the key issues is the lack of scale yet, that we don't have the economy of scale, basically, because there is relatively a small amount of operators that are started to use, but as more and more operators start to use, obviously the average selling price for millimeter wave related solutions and products can significantly decrease further. And you can actually access this report in the Gsm Intelligence website if you're interested, and I'm happy to answer if you have any questions about the model or about the study. And thank you very much for your time, and thanks. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So I'm Jeanette Stewart from Analysys Mason, and I think I am taking over from you to moderate the operator panel. Nice to see you again, Emmanuel. Emmanuel and I have actually, this is the second time this week that we've both been on the same panel session. We were speaking together yesterday as well. So as I mentioned, I'm Jeanette Stewart from Analysys Mason. Analysys Mason are consulting and research specialists in telecoms, media and technology. So I'm part of Analysys Mason's consulting team based here in the UK. Thank you very much to the GSA for asking me to moderate this panel session today. My own interest in this topic is that Analysys Mason is currently working with two GSA members currently, Qualcomm and Ericsson, and we're conducting a study into deployment options for millimeter wave 26 gigahertz in Europe, and that study will be available shortly. As you've already heard in this session so far, millimeter wave products for networks and devices are starting to become available for 26 gigahertz. The spectrum is becoming available in Europe. There has been relatively few countries that have licensed millimeter wave spectrum so far. However, a number are expected to proceed with licensing over the course of 2021. We are very lucky today to have representatives from 3 mobile operators in Europe who are already actively planning for using millimeter wave spectrum. So I am just going to briefly introduce them, and then I will ask each of them to say a few words. So we have Jarno Namila, who's from Elisa in Finland. We have Marco Arioli, who's from Fastweb in Italy, and we have Alexander Balyuk from Beeline in Russia. So welcome, everybody. Could I ask each of you just to say a few words of introduction, and then we may have some questions from the audience, or we can have a discussion afterwards. So Jarno, welcome. Could I ask you to start with your presentation, please?
Okay, thank you, Janet, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jarno Niemelä. I'm coming from Elisa Finland. I'm currently heading the mobile access technologies, including the frequencies as well. And kind of very happy to be here and show, in a way, and discuss about our views on the millimeter wave spectrum and utilization.
Thank you, Jarno. So Marco, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please? Marco, I think you're on mute. We cannot hear you. Shall we move to Alexander? Alexander, could I ask you to introduce yourself, and then we'll come back to Marco?
Yeah. Hello, colleagues. My name is Alexander Balyuk. I work for Beeline company in Russia, and I'm responsible for new technologies deployment and including 5G. So, and we close 5G story in our company end to end, starting from 2018. So, and later I think I can tell you more about our use cases and what we believe and what we don't believe in terms of millimeter wave.
Great, thank you. Marco.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I'm Marco Arioli. I'm from Fastweb, from Italy, and I'm the head of network engineering. So Fastweb is one of the largest alternative operators in Italy, and we have 2.5 million customers on wireline and almost 2 million customers on mobile. We started in 1999 as the fiber company in Italy, and over the time we have, let me say, pioneered all the new coming technologies, as we are an alternative operator, so we are keen on new technologies. And we started in our strategy as a mobile infrastructure operators with the 5G technologies. We started almost 5 years ago, and we have got 40 megahertz in band N78, so band 42 in for the LTE, so 3.5 gigahertz. And we have got 200 megahertz in band 20 in the 26 gigahertz space in the first 5G auction in Italy. So we started our project to roll out, let me say, an FWA 5G network in Italy. We started in late in 2019, and we have started the on-field activities in 2020. So you can imagine the complexity of managing a rollout during the pandemic. But okay, that's another story. And so we are targeting to provide millimeter, and we have already launched the millimeter wave commercial services for our customers.
Thank you, Marco. So we'll come back to you in a minute. So I wonder, just going back to Alexander and Jarno for a minute. So Marco has described the spectrum that Fastweb holds in 26 gigahertz and also the fixed wireless access focus of the services. I wondered if the two of you just wanted to say something about the services that you're thinking of deploying in millimeter wave and the spectrum that you need to enable you to do that.
Okay, if I may start on that one. So kind of, yeah, we are, as an Elisa, we hold the current spectrum of 800 megahertz. And we kind of have started now the early technological trials to understand, in a way, the maturity of the technology. And kind of prior to that one of the key things that was raised by by earlier talks is kind of the coverage of millimeter wave frequencies, and we have also tried to understand that perspective by doing radio signal propagation measurements, and those measurements have kind of showed us and make convinced that, for example, millimeter wave frequencies, even though they are very high, could be used for fixed wireless access services. So running through, in a way, technological learning at the moment, doing some showcases for that one. And I would say that during this year, we probably have a commercial launch. We don't have yet that one. But to be honest, really to have a wide scale role for the millimeter wave, it's a little bit unsure at the moment, mostly from the fact that we hold spectrum for the main 5G frequency 3.5 gigahertz as well, and of course doing huge rollout and put a lot of investment on that 3.5 gigahertz frequency as well. So it's kind of what the benefits at the moment what we are seeking from millimeter wave, kind of limited, I would say, the hotspot areas in the city centrums, and then looking at, for example, private networks, and especially from the uplink performance perspective, and for the low latency services for private network customers. And I would say the third thing that we are kind of actively looking at the moment is the fixed wireless access service. But as I mentioned, we don't have yet a commercial launch in our network.
Thank you, Jarno. And Alexander, do you want to add your perspective on this?
Yeah. So last year, lower part of millimeter wave has been assigned for industry applications in Russia. So it's a lower part of N258. So also part of N257 has been assigned, but for pilot use. So and for EMC testing with current spectrum users. So and it gives us opportunity to feel the market and technology limits before investing hard into it. And of course, we understand all issues related to limited coverage areas, but it's a matter of use cases. And during our research, based on our practice, we figure out several cases for ourselves, which we believe in. As I already mentioned, it is industry applications, and we have several requests from existing customers already. So we have experience in B2B2C, let's put it like this, applications for entertainment and education. So in 2019, we launched a 5G playground for VR tourism. So it's kind of time machine. So you can visit the same place, but a century ago, let's put it like this. So last year we've launched in St. Petersburg, first in Russia, free motion VR playground. So it's a kind of, it was a promotion of one of our new gaming products. So, but we see that all these, let's say, entertainment technologies utilizing 5G connectivity can be used for education as well. So, and for B2C market, we believe in hotspots. So, and we hope that customer equipment penetration with millimeter wave will grow in our market, and it will give us more motivation to invest it within B2C segment. So these are main, let's say, focuses related to millimeter wave technology we have right now. So this year we maybe have more to say and more to show to our customers and our B2B partners. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I wondered if each of you might want to comment a little bit more on what you see as being the benefits of using mmWave for the use cases that you've just described. So I think we've heard mention of very high peak speeds, the ability to sort of locally deploy, sort of potentially vary the traffic profiles, low latency as well. Could you each say just, and I wondered as well if you might want to say something just about sort of what those peak speeds are and what distance, you know, between the base station and the device. Do you each want to say something on that? Marco, maybe starting with you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. So I have to say that in Italy, we still have two different speed in terms of connection for the end user customers. So we have, let me say, gigabit per second connection where fiber optics is there. So in the major cities, in the very dense urban areas, but we still have, let me say, wide areas with very poor connection. And we have a lot of people living there, and we have a lot of small and medium enterprises in those locations. So we still have a gap in terms of speed for providing a very good connection for the end user customer, both for citizens and for businesses. And the last 12 months during the pandemic has highlighted, as you can imagine, let me say, the importance of having a very high-performing connection is not a matter of just entertainment, but is also a matter of daily life. It's a matter of be able to work by remote and all, let me say, the changes in our life that we have seen in the last period. So we started with our strategy to provide fiber-like performances in those areas with our plan. The goal is to provide coverage up to 40% of the population with this 5G FWA coverage. And in the field trial that we have got in before starting the commercial services, we have been able to provide up to 1 gigabit per second. So we are talking about 700, 800, 900 megabit per second, up to 300, 400 meters between the base station and the receiving antenna. Our approach is to provide an outdoor unit to the end user customers, reaching as much as possible the line of sight to provide best performances and service stability. But I have to say that we have got also very good performances up to 900 meters, up to, let me say, 1 kilometers. So we are able to provide several hundred megabit per second up to 1 kilometer. So we're talking about 400, 500 megabit per second downstream. And this is, let me say, testing the 26 gigahertz, the millimeter wave. To me, it was the first time where I got better performances in field compared to the ones that I got on PowerPoint or Excel. So that was really amazing for us. We thought that we were missing something, but maybe in Italy we have, let me say, the buildings are based on concrete, so we have a lot of reflection that are helping to reach, let me say, a near line of sight connection. And the cities that we are targeting are not the major cities, as in those cities we have fiber optics, but are the tier 2 cities, so are, let me say, the largest cities, but the second rank. So we are talking about 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people living in that urban area. So we are talking about quite small cities. So with 1 kilometer radius, we can reach the majority of the buildings in that areas. So we can provide a very high performing connection. And with the first commercial lines that we have already delivered in the network, we are getting very good outcomes. So the results are confirming what we've got in the trial. For sure, we are still in an early phase, so we have to to see what will happen with as the customers will increase, the traffic load will increase for sure. The club use is for sure something very interesting from our point of view, as we can enlarge our blocks from 200 megahertz up to 1 gigahertz. Actually, 800 megahertz, as there's a limitation on, let me say, equipment side, but that's, another limitation. Is not related to the regulation. But let me say, the club use is something really interesting in order to provide better performances. The performances that I've said before was related just to our 20 megahertz block. So it's let me say the minimum quantity of bandwidth and performance that we can provide the customer with.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, the 1 kilometer link that you mentioned, the CPE that you implemented, I think that was a external CPE on the side of a building. Is that correct?
Yeah. The 5G CPE, receiving CPE at the customer site, is an outdoor unit. So we are installing, let me say, we are trying to reach a rooftop installation. If that's the option number one. If that's not possible, we go on balcony or facade in order to provide the connection. So as we are talking about, let me say, small cities, medium cities, it's quite, let me say, it's easier than this kind of installation compared to the bigger cities. So it's.
And on the base station end, you're using macro height sites. Yes, correct.
Yeah. We are leveraging, let me say, the standard macro sites where we have the standard mobile equipment. So the sub-6 gigahertz spectrum.
Thank you. So, Jarno and Alexander, do you want to say anything about the speeds and the distance? Because if not, there's a few other questions from the audience that I can ask you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So maybe I could comment something about the speed. So we started, by looking at the indoors for the kind of private network perspective, and it was quite easy to. With the spectrum of 800 megahertz to reach 4 gigabit per second per UE levels, and kind of we are obviously looking at later on a little bit the technological enhancements there. For example, towards multi-user MIMO that could we expand the network capacity as well to several gigabits. And up from the uplink perspective, we got a staple of, let's say, 200 megs, 250 megs performance, which is kind of a superior to the experience that we can obtain in 3.5. However, the 200 megs in the uplink direction was also limited by the spectrum, so the devices or the network was able to support 200 megahertz of spectrum. Then a little bit the similar kind of experiences as Marco have had. So in the kind of a line of sight scenarios in outdoors, looking at the ranges of 400 to 500, 400 meters. So we obtain like several gigabits, 3 gigabit level of service there. But of course, immediately when we go to the kind of obstructed line of sight or non-line of sight situation, so we see kind of the tremendous drop in the throughput and in the performance. And those radio signal measurements that we have had, they kind of convinced us to look at the coverage side as well. And we, based on our measurements, we have been looking at ranges up to 1 kilometer or even up to 2 kilometers that we could still obtain gigabit level of service band. And this is something that we need to kind of confirm with the fixed wireless approach. Including also the outdoor antenna unit for that one. So kind of looking at only fixed wireless access for the indoor without external antenna. So that's kind of no option for us.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. So in general, we also, as a first step, we had this bitrate competition. So when we utilized all 800 megahertz to have 3 to 4 gigabits per second. So when we finished, we understand that we need to focus on something more customer oriented. So we made a hotspot in one of our sports arenas where we showed to bloggers who just got new devices and with mmWave what is the difference in user experience using the same applications using the 4G and 5G network. So, and we did this experiment to show let's say, the benefits of 5G to real customers with smartphones. So, next steps where we start to utilize 5G latencies, because and we found out that so the best example to show this is VR. So, and we start thinking about useful cases for our customers where the VR will be good for them. So I mentioned two of them: VR tourism and gaming, and free motion VR gaming. It was a playground around 200 square meters, not more. So where we have around from around 4 people in average using the devices in the same time, having no problem with connectivity. So, and we plan to use this technology for education for our B2B customers, where they need, for instance, to guide you through some safety rules and to show you the most real picture you will have in the field. So not just read a paper that you are not allowed to do this, this, and this. You have to do this, this, and this. You need to go in field using VR and understand why it is important to go along with these safety rules. So, and that's what is about. All our playgrounds were outdoors. So we had the only one we have indoor. So, but in general, there is no difference because it was a kind of closed area of around 200 square meters.
Thank you very much. So I think we're just coming to the end of our time. But I just wanted to just throw one more question in, and just a quick answer from each of you is about the ecosystem for mmWave and how you would ideally like to see that evolve. So there's a couple of questions about from the audience about moving towards a standalone mode of mmWave, and also sort of evolution of antenna modules, form factors as well, sort of moving towards perhaps smaller base stations for indoors, etc. Do you want to just sort of highlight what you think the most important developments are from your perspective? So Marco, maybe starting with you. I think you're on mute.
Okay,
Okay.
From the ecosystem point of view, I can say that as we have 50% of our revenues coming from the businesses and public administration market, we are looking also to, so the FWA is the first step. The second step is to provide additional use cases like indoor coverage for connecting laptop, high definition cameras, other devices than smartphones or 5G FWA CPE. I can say that there's a lot of innovations. There's a lot of, let me say, activities on these new devices. What I can say is that the main issues so far that we have is related to the non-standalone and standalone. So far, the chipset ecosystems, the technology ecosystem is, let me say, focused on supporting NSA scenarios. So it's from our point of view, it's quite strong limitations. The next and coming generation of chipset will support also the standalone. but there are still, let me say, some delays between the smartphone applications, that is, let me say, the market trendsetter, and what we need on, let me say, on mmWave to enable all those kind of new services that are not, let me say, smartphone oriented. There's plenty of new services that need features that have to be supported by those devices. One is the standalone, but another is the from our point of view, the Ethernet PDU, in order to provide more flexibility in traffic management.
Thank you very much, Marco. And Jarno, just moving to you.
Yeah, certainly. Kind of wrapping up. So, kind of our experience at the moment is that we would kind of like to see more maturity from the network side perspective, especially, for example, looking at the radio solutions towards more indoor or small cell oriented approaches, and also kind of looking at the selected vendors. So obviously there are some certain limitations in the availability of proper radio per use scenario. We have a macro, we have a micro sites, and still looking at further development there. From the device perspective, kind of we see there is obviously markets for CPEs, handset or smartphones, and also for the laptops, and a little bit depending obviously on the use case. But kind of what we need to do obviously is the push forward especially the OEMs to kind of activate also the European frequencies for those devices, so that they could now enter kind of the mass markets as well. So kind of I would say, as summing up, so maturity from the technology perspective for the networks, and also a little bit more maturity from the device perspective.
Thank you, Jarno. And Alexander, just coming to you about this, the evolution of the ecosystem.
So I absolutely agree with colleagues. So we are looking for, let's say, enhancement of the portfolio from network side vendors. In terms of devices, of course, smartphones, of course, pads, of course, notebooks, and we see that 5G technology should appear more and more in various devices like VR headsets, AR headsets, and so on, in order to avoid this, let's say, additional step of Wi-Fi, which sometimes make problems.
Understood. Well, I would just like to thank you all very much for participating today. I think we're going to be joined by Stuart Cook, who's going to just make some concluding remarks, I believe. So thank you, Alexander, Jarno, and Marco, and
thank you.
Handing over to Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. For those of you who are with us, you'll notice I am not Luigi. He is having some technical issues with his laptop. So it's my pleasure to summarize the session. And we started at the beginning. You know, the global and the European regulations are now in place, and we have a lot of movement in Europe with licensing of the mmWave spectrum. We've heard in detail from the regulators in Italy, in Germany, in Finland, and Russia, and the operators as well. But let's not forget Greece as well, and future other countries, Denmark, Slovenia, etc., all licensing and more to follow. So we have a lot of momentum now in terms of countries that have licensed or are going to license this year and next year. So And we heard in detail from some of the operators about, you know, the challenges and the areas that they're beginning to think about and focus on in terms of fixed wireless access or industrial education, indoor and outdoor deployments. And the licensing model, there are a variety of licensing models, whether that's nationwide, a hybrid, a club, a local area. And it's clear, I think, that not one size fits all. The trials, you know, as the operators have said, they need to lead to clear market opportunities to trigger those investments. As always, when we start with a new technology and a new frequency band, always questions around the equipment availability. And I'm assured by many of the members from GSA infrastructure that will be there this year for the whole of the 26 gigahertz band. The upper 1 gigahertz is already there. And you can see from the previous slides that momentum is building around the chipsets and the devices. And I guess from a GSA point of view, if you're a regulator that's perhaps a little hesitant, we would really encourage you now to begin licensing of the mmWave, all of the 26 gigahertz to begin with. And it's that combination of low, mid and high bands that really together enables that full 5G vision. And then Europe is beginning to finalize the 40 gigahertz, and that will then follow. So on behalf of GSA, thank you very much for joining us, all of the speakers, but also Qualcomm for sponsoring this event. So I'm now handing over to Richard. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stuart, and thank you to all our panelists and for you for attending today's GSA Insight webinar. After the event, as mentioned, you will receive a recording of the discussion, links to all the reports that have been talked about today, and the slides with the GSA data on it. More data on the state of mmWave globally can also be found on the website, gsacom.com, where you can also find executive summaries of the reports, which are available for free download. More granular data is available within the searchable Gambod database, which is a resource for GSA members and associates. And again, more information on the Gambod database you'll find on the website. To keep in touch with the latest research and data, please do follow GSA on social channels. You'll find Global Mobile Supply Association on Twitter, LinkedIn, WeChat and Weibo. And if you visit gsacom.com, you'll be able to subscribe to the research digest emails and new report notifications. To that end, next month, future events in a bit of discussion around 5G standalone. The first GSA snapshot webinar, half-hour snapshot webinar, will be on the 17th of March, which will look at the 5G non-standalone and standalone market and the status of that globally. And then on the 30th of March, we'll also be holding the plenary session of the GSA 4G, 5G fixed wireless access forum. And again, more information on how to get involved with that forum, please do visit the website. So finally, again, on behalf of all the panelists and the GSA, I'd like to express our thanks to all our speakers today and to you all for attending this webinar. Many thanks.